Solomon. I'm not going to let Mr. Solomon get me depressed. I'm not going to let Brother Solomon get me depressed. I'm in too good a mood. The rascal had personal issues, challenges. Solomon had personal challenges, issues, and moods. You know, there's a lot of common sense in Ecclesiastes. I mean, he's got a lot of kind of negativity he conveys in spots, but ultimately he rallies from it by the grace of God. Do you agree with me that he got squared away with God at the end of his book, apparently?
I do, but I also kind of like the negativity of each part is, to me, made sense to, like, it was like appropriate negativity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to...
You know, the occultist, am I online, Peter? Am I online? I'm turning it off a second before I say this. Am I on? Hello? Lucy, I'm home. Hi. So we are in Ecclesiastes, and before I pray tonight, just a couple of little housekeeping things. If you look in your notes, I included an introduction to Ecclesiastes, and then there are some footnotes from Ecclesiastes, starting with chapter 1, chapter 2, and so forth. And then there's an introduction to Song of Solomon. And so the Song of Solomon introduction is there for a very specific reason. I'll try and go over it just briefly at the beginning. But next week will be Song of Solomon. And then after Song of Solomon, we'll get into the book of Isaiah. And in fact, I'll spend a portion of the session, not next week, but in 2 weeks, introducing all of the prophets, major and minor writing prophets. And we'll get into a measure of a portion of Isaiah's writings in 2 weeks. And so 2 weeks, let me get that date, we will start a 6-week study on Isaiah. And that'll be Wednesday, the 29th of May. And so we'll start a 6-week study on Isaiah, and then we will have, I'm not sure yet, but probably a 5-week study on Jeremiah, and then something similar on Ezekiel, 5 or 6 weeks on Daniel. Daniel is a smaller book, but there's much more distance to travel in the book of Daniel as far as tying it to other scriptures. And so as I mentioned previously, I am not an eschatology nut. I'm not like overly fascinated with what's this prophecy mean, what's that prophecy mean. And in fact, I probably teach less on the prophets per se than I do the rest of the Bible. But I do study it. I just don't talk about it a lot because a lot of it's just guesswork. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about the prophets and they say things, this definitively means this, you know, and I think far more often we're safe to say this could mean so-and-so, this could be referring to so-and-so, but it may not be. And so next week, I think I mentioned to y'all that I was taking my wife out of town for a little vacation for her 60th birthday. And so Joe Kim will be teaching Wednesday night on Song of Solomon. And so if we could, let me just kind of go over this introduction to Song of Solomon. And Joe will take it in one of several directions. So Song of Solomon, of course, is attributed to Solomon himself. The date is specifically unknown, but of course during his 970 to 930 BC reign, and probably a long time before his death, maybe 20 years before his death, is poetry and wisdom literature. And it's called Solomon's Song of Songs. It's literally, the title is Solomon's Song of Songs in the Hebrew literature. And the idea being ultimate song. Song of Songs, ultimate song, his ultimate love song. And so this is a guy who penned 3,000 proverbs and songs, and this was his ultimate song. It's probably, depending on who you ask, and since I'm teaching, it's probably the most beautiful love poem ever written. You know, either for human love or between the love between God and man. It is a beautiful love poem. If you look in the middle under general content in that little handout I gave you, there's a number of different views for interpreting the Song of Solomon. I'm just giving you these to kind of meditate on, because you're going to be reading Song of Solomon before y'all get together with Joe next week. The first view is that it's a poetic view of marital love and romantic affection. And in that vein, the Jewish religious Jews will not yet let a young man read Song of Solomon till after he's bar mitzvahed, because they think it's too provocative for a prepubescent male to read it, because it's about this, you know, stirring up desire and so forth. And then the second view is it's an allegory of the love of God between God and Israel, the love God has between he and Israel. And I think that view too is always in play, regardless of these other two possibilities for interpretations. But the Jews, by and large, look at it as an allegory between them and God. The third view is it's an allegory of love between Jesus and his church, the universal church, in all generations. And the fourth view is a little more provocative, and that it's an allegory of love between Jesus and the bride of Christ. And if you subscribe to view 4, then the bride of Christ is a subset within the universal church. And some of you here sat under our friend, the late Wade Taylor. He was in this camp. He believed that the bride was a smaller group within the church. And he used to say that if you think about it, in every church, there's a lot of people that are sincere, and then there's a core of really hungry people in the church that are really passionate for God. And among that more passionate core group found in every church, he believed that the bridal company was located, that it was a called out group within the group. And there's some scripture to lean on that. So the characters, the beloved Shulamite, the lover, King Solomon, the friends or daughters of Jerusalem. By the way, Brother Wade thought those were church people, the daughters of Jerusalem, that were there to provide attention and perfection for the true bride of Christ through their criticisms and their interactions. That's an interesting take, but that's what he believed. And the Shulamite was probably Abishag, the last of King David's wives. Remember, Solomon's brother wanted to marry this young lady, Abishag of Shulam. And so she is probably this Shulamite. That's historically, that's what most Bible scholars believe. And so this lady may have in fact been the young lady that David was with, but never consummated the marriage with. Does everybody remember late in life they got a beautiful young lady to be with him, to kind of nurse him and take care of his personal needs? And so Solomon would have seen her in the wings, you know, as he was in and out with his dad, and seeing her interact and minister to his father, and may have fallen deeply in love with her. So just file that away. You can just put that one away. And as you're reading next week, just kind of consider those different possibilities of interpretive keys for Solomon. And Joe Kim will enlighten you tremendously in my absence, I'm sure, next Wednesday. So let's pray. Lord, we bless you. We thank you for Ecclesiastes. We thank you for Solomon, the life of Solomon. We thank you, God, for the writings that we have, this 3,000-year-old ancient wisdom literature, God, and we acknowledge that there is wisdom to be gleaned from this writing. Lord, we don't take it lightly. This is a book that's not commonly studied and taught in great depth. And Lord, we don't want to give it short shift, but it is the inspired word of the living God. And so we acknowledge that, and we ask that you would show us the things you have for us from this book tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. So, Gail, you want to sit over there or you want to sit in the middle? Where you got a table in front of you. So, Ecclesiastes, introduction to Ecclesiastes. Once again, the author is King Solomon. The first line of Song of Solomon says the words of the preacher, the son of David, who was king in Jerusalem. So it's very clear the king in Jerusalem, the son of David, this preacher is Solomon. The word Ecclesiastes means preacher. Many of you have heard ecclesiastical authority, meaning a clerical, a clergy authority and so forth. So Ecclesiastes means preacher or teacher. And the book, I think, this is going to sound strange to some people. I think it's Solomon's giving his testimony. I think he's talking about this is my personal view. You won't find this verified by every commentator. But I think this is his personal testimony toward the end of his life. I think he looks back on his life and he says, I did this, that, and the other. I found no meaning for my life until I realized life's about a relationship with God. And so the thing ends on a high note in terms of him pointing that the meaning of life is really to come to know the Lord and to be in right relationship with the Lord. But on his journey of these 12 chapters, he gets kind of maudlin at times and negative. He has some negativity. There's also some proverbs dropped within the context of Ecclesiastes. We don't think of Ecclesiastes as a book of Proverbs, but indeed it does have some proverbs that are applicable in every generation. The King James uses the word vanity a number of times, 29 times in fact. And the word vanity in King James really is meaningless or futile or futility. And so I'm going to use vanity. I don't think I'm going to switch back and forth and try to give you the amplified version every time I say vanity. But that's what it means. To us, the word vanity means you're really proud of yourself. You're full of yourself. You think everybody admires you and so forth. That's not what it means in the King James. Again, it means meaningless or futile or futility. And so that's a very different modern meaning than the current word for vanity in our modern English. And so if you look under the notes under general content, it's Proverbs and poetry. It is written in a poetic style. The book focuses on the meaning of life. It examines the human condition and life on earth. And the author's conclusion is that everything you were taught can be put into a few words. Respect and obey God. That's what life's all about. That's from the second to the last verse in the contemporary English version. I like that. Respect and obey God. That's what life is all about. And if we recall the words of the Westminster Confession, to know God and enjoy Him forever is what life's all about. It's what the Westminster Confession says. So Solomon's not far from that. And it also encourages us in various places to enjoy the simple blessings of life. Enjoy your family, enjoy your wife, enjoy your work. Be satisfied with what you have. Don't be covetous for a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of common sense saying, look, you only go through life one time. Enjoy yourself along the way. And he's not encouraging you to enjoy yourself in sinful pursuits, but those things that are granted to us, I think Solomon is pointing a lot of them out, saying, don't undervalue this in the days of your flesh. It's not all about what comes next while you're living on the earth. Enjoy the creation that God's given us. I think I'm going to just jump right into the text, if I may. And so, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So futility of futilities, meaningless of the meaningless, everything is meaningless. What profit has a man of all of his labor under the sun, which he takes under the sun? One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. So he's pointing to the finite nature of man This is one of the reasons I think he's an older man looking back. He's seeing that his days have been fleeting. I think Solomon, if I recall correctly, died at age 57. So he didn't live to be a very old man, but he knew that he was probably aging suddenly. The sun, verse 5, the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to his place where he rose. The wind goes towards the south and turns about to the north. It whirls continually and the wind returns again according to its circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea isn't full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, there they return again. So the cycles of nature continue beyond the will of man. All things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with the hearing. The thing that has been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. And so that verse 9, I've heard that verse 9 applied in many different situations. At the end of the day, he's talking about the human condition. He's not talking about if somebody made a widget, that the thing was made in ancient Atlantis sometime before. Sometimes people take these things too far. But it's talking about the things that are common to man. There's no new thing under the sun that's common to man. Verse 10, is there anything whereof it can be said, see, this is new. It has already been of old times, which was before us. And so all these things are common. Now, jump to verse 12. I, the preacher, so this is first person from the author. I, the preacher, was the king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail has God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold all its vanity and vexation of spirit. So let me just step aside, and I'm not reviling anybody, but just kind of let your imagination go to someone like a Michael Jackson, who as a very young man had unlimited means to pursue whatever he wanted to in terms of pleasure, desire, possessions. This is young Solomon. I'm the king. I got all the money I want. I can do whatever I want. I can go whatever I want. I can have whoever I want in terms of a wife or a concubine or whatever. And so Solomon said to himself, okay, I'm just going to take all this to the max and see how I can indulge myself and see if there's satisfaction in that. And so think about the pop culture of the day and the ones that have gone by. And I imagine a lot of these people experienced some of the same dynamics that Solomon went through. This is all meaningless. I got all this money, all this power. What people seek for pleasure, I've got it, but it's not giving me any pleasure, any lasting joy. And I'm not pointing fingers, particularly at Michael Jackson. I'm just using him as someone who's always struck me as a sad case, to be honest with you. As this little child came into the world with like this life of destiny before him, and it ended so tragically bad. The whole thing was just not a good situation. But back to Solomon, verse 16 of chapter 1. I communed with my own heart, saying, lo, I am come to great estate, or I have become a great person, a great man, very powerful, and have gotten more wisdom than all they which you have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart has great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. And I perceive that this is also vexation of spirit. Another translation for verse 17 is grasping at the wind instead of vexation of spirit. I like that, by the way. The meaningless pursuit of things is like grasping at the wind. Verse 18, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. And so Solomon is setting the stage for what's about to come about. By the way, the Amplified on that word vanity says emptiness, falsity, vainglory, vapor. He uses those words. And so he's recognizing that everything man treasures is nothing. He states that going in. And then he starts his exploration. In chapter 2, I said to my heart in verse 1, go to now, prove you with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this is also vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what's it doing? What's it for? I sought in my heart to give myself to wine, And so he starts to list a litany of things that he says, well, everybody seems to think, wine makes you happy. I'll pursue wine and see if it makes me happy. And so he tried wine. In verse 4, I made great works. I built houses. I planted vineyards. And he's saying that, some people want to live in a mansion. I had that. I did that. Some people want to build huge building projects. I built the Temple of Solomon, one of the greatest buildings ever constructed on the earth. I planted vineyards, to the point where I had thousands of servants working them. Verse 5, I made gardens and orchards. I planted trees in them and all kinds of fruit. I made pools of water. Verse 7, I got servants and made servants and had servants born in my house. Also, I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. So as far as the residents there, he was the greatest owner of all these things, an example of pursuing them. In verse 8, I gathered also silver and gold and the peculiar treasure of kings. Remember, he made silver like stones in Jerusalem as nothing, I got men singers and women singers and the delights of the Son of Men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. You may remember he even invented musical instruments. Verse 9, so I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. That's an interesting statement in verse 9, because it seems like he's not behaving in a wise manner. But he's talking about his insight into things. Remember, people would come to inquire with him about animals and the animal kingdom and nature. His wisdom went far beyond just a memory for names and places. He had insight into the created order, apparently. And that wasn't taken away from him while he was in the midst of all this foolishness. By the way, do you think super intelligent people suffer more for their foolishness than ignorant people? Have you ever noticed someone who's mentally handicapped to the point where they're always happy? I've seen it many, many times. You know what I'm talking about? People have like a Down syndrome child or something that's, can be 45 years old, but just kind of always smiling, happy, satisfied. And yet you meet sometimes very intelligent, very wealthy people that are just totally miserable. What heaven intended to bless them with, the devil has managed to turn it against them. Anyway, verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I kept not from them. Imagine that. I'll take that and that and that and that. Remember, this is a guy who can have anything he wants. Almost, literally, he's the king. Well, that's my wife. I don't care. I want that wife. I don't care. That's my house. I want that house. I want that horse. I want whatever. I'm the king. It's mine. So I kept nothing from me. I withheld not my heart from any joy. So think of anything, all the pleasures of the flesh people pursue. Verse 11, then I looked on all the works of my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, it was all vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun. Verse 15, and then I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, so it happens even to me. And why was I then more wise? And I said to my heart, this is also vanity. He's talking about, I'm going to die. My life is just like everybody else's. I have to deal with the same problems, but I got all this wisdom. I got all this wealth. Therefore, it's what's it worth to me? Verse 17, therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous to me, for all its vanity and vexation of spirit. I want to just stop for a second. Does everybody remember the late Johnny Carson? Johnny Carson was, in my opinion, one of the funniest guys on television in his day. And at one point, he was the highest paid entertainer on television. And he was interviewed, and I caught a part of the interview, and they were talking about all this money he was making. And he kind of wistfully said, the only thing money does is take away the question of how am I going to pay my bills. He said, I have to deal with everything else everybody else does. This was a guy who went through multiple broken marriages. Reputedly, he was very nervous. The stuff he had to do publicly, he was very uncomfortable as a public personality and all that. And I didn't know Johnny Carson. I don't know his spiritual life. But just from that one interview, that statement, the only thing money does for you is to take away the worry of how am I going to pay my bills. If you think about it, for us in this room, your money won't save your children, your loved ones. Your money won't comfort you. Your money won't be your friend. Your money won't be someone you can trust. Your money, people who don't have money think that that's what I need. That'll satisfy me. Solomon came to the realization this doesn't cut it. And I think a lot of people do. Sadly, before the end of his life, or thankfully, I believe, before the end of his life, Solomon came to the realization that God was the reason he was here, not his money. But verse 18, I hated all my labor, which I had taken under the sun, because I was going to leave it to a man that would be after me. So here was this guy who had amassed more wealth in Israel than anybody before him, and the realization hit him, you can't take it with you, Solomon. And then he began to think, what kind of idiot is going to get all my money? I'm not going to go into those verses, but in the course of Ecclesiastes, if you read it, he muses about that. Like, what joker is going to get this stuff I've accumulated? What kind of person are they going to be? What kind of wisdom are they going to have? Verse 24, there's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. Now, in that, he's talking about enjoying the simple pleasures of life. He pursued the not-so-simple things. A few years ago, I was riding through a place where there's no electricity. And there was a guy with me in the car. And there was all these little houses. It was just after dark. But the little places, these little mud houses, nobody had a fire going. All the lights were out. And my friend said, in a way, these people are lucky. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, when the sun goes down, their day is over. There's no bills coming. There's nobody going to knock on the door. There's no sirens outside. There's no cars driving by. We didn't see a car other than hours for hours. But I thought about it in a way. They grow up and they live with people they know around them. They know their surroundings. There's I wouldn't trade this for that. But there is a blessing in that for anybody that can see it. You understand what I'm saying? They live in a simpler context with a different standard for their lives that's probably much closer to the way we were created than the way you and I live in this context. Anyway, Solomon, he realized in verse 24 that there were simple foods you could eat and things you could drink. There was labor that was productive and made you feel good about your day and how you spent your day. And that these things were gifts from God that most people didn't recognize. Okay, chapter 3 starts with probably the most famous verses in the Song of Solomon. And if I want to go to the notes on this, because I've got this broken out in the New International Version. This is the... To everything there's a season and a time and a purpose under heaven. And in some ways, this is like the pinnacle of Ecclesiastes. Yeah, there's been lots of songs written about it. The Birds and others. But look at Ecclesiastes this is actually the New International Reader's Version, not the New International Version. It's slightly different wording. Somebody read that for me out loud. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. It's in your notes under chapter 3. And read it loud if you would. Don't be shy, boys and girls. Somebody read. Go ahead.
There is a time for everything. There's a time for everything that is done on earth. There is a time to be born and there's a time to die. There's a time to plant and there's a time to pull up what is planted. There's a time to kill and there's a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and there's a time to build up. There's a time to cry and there's a time to laugh. There is a time to be sad and there's a time to dance. There is a time to scatter stones and there's a time to gather them. There is a time to hug and there's a time not to hug. There is a time to search and there's a time to stop searching. There is a time to keep and there is a time to throw away. There is a time to tear and there is a time to mend. There is a time to be silent and there is a time to speak. There is a time to love and there is a time to hate. There is a time for war and there is a time.
All right, so what does he mean by there's a time? the use of that, there's a time. Or if you want to exchange a season, there's a season for each of these things. What does he mean by that? There's a time for these things. There's a season for these things. Gail, was that a raising of the hand or was that a moving of the hair?
Occasion.
There's an occasion for it, but in other words, there's a... Elaborate on that. Obviously, there's going to be an occasion of everybody's death. What does he mean by each of these things, prefacing it with there's a time? There's no wrong answer. I'm just asking what you think. There's cycles in our lives. I think that's definitely part of what he's alluding to.
It rains, it doesn't rain. In other words, it may be different obstacles we face.
Yeah, I think that's true too. What else? Anybody else have any insight on that? The aspect, not the specific times mentioned, but just the concept, just the phrase that is breaking life into these. There's a time for us.
Maybe it's a Hebraic expression.
It's a poetic device for sure, but I don't know that it's idiom. You mean an idiom, a Hebrew idiom? I don't think it's idiomatic. It might be. So, and this is personal opinion. I think he's saying of the overarching theme of the book is things common to man. So these things are all, we're going to go through them. Everybody here is going to go through these things.
So I was thinking, the Torah, the first part, they're going to have the feasts, the fall feasts. So
Yes.
God has got an order, and so these occasions fit into order. These different obstacles we face, different time, calendar year that God created.
I could see that. It's interesting when you break it out like this one has it broken out. There's a progression in each line. Time to be born, a time to die. He gives there's a starting point and there's a finish line. The next one, time to plant and time to pull up. Starting point, finish line, Time to kill, backwards, and a time to heal. Time to tear down, time to build up. Time to cry, time to laugh. I think he's talking about things that are common to man. He's talking about be aware of what season of life you're in, that you're going to have to go through these things, that there is something on the other side of crying. Your whole life's not going to be crying. There's going to be times of laughing. You may go through laughing now, but there will come again times of sadness. It's as you said, Gail, cyclical. These things are cyclical. A time to be sad and a time to dance. At a funeral, I've been to many funerals of godly people. But you don't break out dancing at a funeral, even of a godly person. There's a time to appropriately be respectful and solemn and have a measure of decorum. You don't. You understand what I'm saying? You don't start riotously celebrating at a funeral like you would at another occasion, at a ball game or whatever. So it's talking about appropriate response to the season you're in. It's talking about an awareness that these things are going to happen. It's talking about mature behavior, like a time to hug and a time to refrain from hugging. And you can see that as far as maturity or immaturity or inappropriate behavior. How many of you have ever known someone who just seemed like their mother didn't teach them to behave appropriately? I'm talking about an adult.
Yes.
And so this is talking, a measure of this is like an appropriate, balanced life, to respond to the things that come. A time to be silent, a time to speak, for example. And a time for war, a time for peace. That's interesting. There is indeed, sadly, a time for war.
And like you're kind of alluding to, there's a struggle within humanity not being in the time of spirit.
That's right. Yeah, and there's a desire in all of us, me especially, when the times are not pleasant, to hurry it. But there needs to be an awareness. This is part of the cycle of life. You go through times of sorrow, loss, celebration, happy times, hard times. These things are going to happen to all of us. And in whatever season you're in, it all ultimately, the end of the book comes back to an awareness of we're here for a finite moment, and life is all about coming into right relationship with the Lord. That these things that are common to man are going to happen to us, and we need to be mature and aware that they're part of the way the Lord set this thing up. It doesn't mean we have to embrace bad things, but we need to be aware that they're common to man. So just continuing after the 8 verses, drop down to verse 11 in chapter 3. It says, God made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has set the world in their heart so that no man can find out the work that God made from the beginning to the end. That chapter 3, verse 11, there's a better wording for that in your notes also. This one's from the New International Version. He has set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. I love that phrase, God has set eternity in the human heart. In whatever culture you find on earth, there's an awareness of eternity and the finite nature of man. God has put eternity in the human heart. I heard somebody say one time, one of the reasons we resist death so much is we down deep we know that we were not intended to die. We were not created as beings who were intended to die. So for us, you hear people say death is a natural part of life. No, for us it's not. It was not what heaven intended. And so we resist death. Not only is it the last enemy to be overcome, it's just unnatural to us. And we know it. Something deep within us rebels against death. Verse 12, I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. Now, in this section, he's not talking about gluttony or drunkenness. He's talking about just enjoying your lot in life. If you got beans and rice, enjoy your beans and rice, whatever it is. Verse 17, I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. So once again, this reference to there's a season for these things. Judgment is coming, for the righteous and the wicked. Ultimately, there will be a time for that. Verse 20, all go to one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. And so a little bit like Job reflection, in that. Verse 22, wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? This is an interesting concept, because he goes to this over and over again, talking about you don't get to see what comes next. You don't get to see, you know what's in front of you, you know what you're in the middle of, but once you're in the grave, that part of your existence has transitioned somewhere else. You're not going to be observing these things, participating in these things again. Chapter 4, so I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of such were oppressed. And they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. So he's talking about people who undeservedly are in one better position than another person. Verse 2, therefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. And before y'all got here, I was talking to Bill that it seems to me like he went through seasons of depression. This sounds like depression to me. I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. Would y'all agree that is not a good, healthy thought pattern? I think a mental health professional would have issues with that thought, Solomon. Verse 3, yea, better is he than both they which have not yet been, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So basically he's saying it's better that you never came here than you saw the horrible stuff that happens here. Verse 9. Now this is a bit of a proverb, a positive proverb. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falls, for he has not another to help him up. It's almost like he decided to drop a little wisdom in the midst of his musings, And so in saying the two are better than one, do you think he was musing about himself? He didn't have somebody in his life that was like a friend to say, hey, Solomon, buddy, As an absolute monarch, he probably didn't have any legitimate peers. He might have had confidants and counselors and so forth, but not peers. By the way, in my life, I've had the pleasure of knowing, I still know, several very, very wealthy individuals. And it's interesting, I think of two of them particularly. They're always wondering if this person is my friend because of my money. Do you understand? Both of them are believers. But they're still always wondering if this person is being nice to me because of my money. I could add another who is not as wealthy as the first two, but is definitely a millionaire. And I know for a fact, he's a believer, committed believer. I know for a fact, people always come to him saying, God told me you're supposed to help me do so-and-so. And they do that because they know he has money, not because God said that. But there's like a constant pull on their emotions. Anyway, what heaven intended as a blessing, the devil has tried to use as a weapon against them. I've witnessed it. And so there's always this suspicion. One of the guys has had 3 wives. He's a believer. But it's like, did she really love me or was it just my money kind of thing, And it's very sad. I mean, I've watched it. This is not something I watched for the last year or two. One of them I've known for 40-something years, And I've seen this play out. It happened. He was very wealthy he came into a wealthy family and made a lot more wealth. And so even as a child, he was questioning, does that person want to be my friend because I'm so-and-so? Think about it. They have their own insecurities and all. They're just like everybody else. And sadly, they're my age now, all 3 of the ones I just mentioned, and they all have had great difficulty handling wealth in terms of the way it blessed them or affected their lives negatively. One guy I know, in 1 month, he called me up, he said, in 1 month, 3 people had come to him, 3 groups, and said, we're supposed to buy a property for our church, and God said you were going to give us the money. 1 month, 3 different groups wanted him to buy church property. Think about that. It's a horrible insult, pressure on somebody. What do you say? I mean, you want to be nice and you want to be friendly, but however he worded it, it was basically, well, God hadn't said that to me and my wife, And then everybody leaves mad.
Then a lot of them stay to themselves. They're introverts.
That's what he did. This particular one I'm talking about, he got very introverted. Still is. The suspicion, made him, I won't say bitter, but it just made him isolated,
And imagine the accusation. You're not building the kingdom.
He's heard it all.
Yep.
He's heard it all. As I have all 3 of them, I'm sure, but that one sticks out in my mind because I remember the 3 in 1 month deal. I mean, that's like, the devil inspired that. You know what I mean? To harm that guy emotionally. So back to the idea of 2, verse 12 in chapter 4. If one prevails against him, 2 shall withstand him. Or if one is overpowered by him, 2 shall withstand him. And a 3-fold cord is not easily broken. And of course, this is not talking about a rope. It's talking about 3 people together, supporting one another in the same effort. So this idea of the 3-fold cord. Bill, you may remember I used this 3-fold cord analogy with Church of the Apostles when they came, when the gate was here and we were here and all laboring collectively for the purposes of God, the 3-fold cord.
That always pertain to God and
It does. It does. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you mean? Or
within a marriage, they used to use the scripture.
that's good too. I've never heard that, but that's good.
God, the husband and the wife, as long as the 3 of y'all are together, they can't be broken.
That's good. That's good. And so, yeah, if you've ever seen rope, of course, the 3-strand rope is the analogy, but it's talking about relationships. Verse 13 is another proverb. Better is a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. And once again, consider the author. Consider the author and what was ruminating in his spirit when he wrote that. Chapter 5, verse 1. Keep your foot when you go to the house of God, and be ready to hear, more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. He's talking about speaking. Speaking is the sacrifice of fools, is what he's saying. For they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with your mouth, and don't let your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and you're upon the earth, therefore let your words be few. So by definition, what is the sacrifice of fools according to Solomon? Somebody help me.
Opening their mouth for the wrong time.
Running your mouth. That's what he's saying. I like that. The sacrifice of fools. Now, if somebody was running their mouth and you were talking to them and said, that sounds like the sacrifice of fools, they might not know that you're insulting them. Probably would because of the word fools.
Yeah, you can't get away with that.
That's right. Verse 3, for a dream comes through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. You know, I think we could all agree with that too. Drop down to verse 19. Every man also to whom God has given riches and wealth, and has given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. And so this verse 19 in a different version. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. What he's saying is most people who have wealth and possessions are not happy. They're not satisfied with it. You know, like, remember the old Beatles song, "Your money can't buy your love"? You know, there's everybody that doesn't have money thinks if they just had money, they'd be happy. But it's not true. You know, the source of happiness is not money. I would certainly agree it's good not to have to worry about how you're going to pay your bills. But it doesn't save your family. It doesn't fix your health problem. It doesn't fix your heartbreak. It doesn't fix betrayal. It doesn't fix all the things that are common to man, other than the question of how you're going to have money to pay for things. Chapter 6, verse 1. There's an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he wants for nothing for his soul of all that he desires, yet God has not given him the power thereof, or to eat thereof, but a stranger eats it. This is vanity, and it's an evil disease. Think of a guy with a terminal stomach disease or a terminal esophageal cancer. All the money in the world for any food he wants, but ulcers, chronic ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, whatever. He can't retain the nourishment. Somebody else eats all the things. Now, that verse 2, the man who God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he wants for nothing. And his soul, all that his soul desires, but God's not given the power to eat them. Think of the story of the rich fool that Jesus told in Luke. You know, the guy that says, I'm satisfied, I'm wealthy, I'm going to build more barns to store up my goods. And Jesus says, you fool, tonight your life's going to be required of you. You thought that your satisfaction was going to be in your possessions, your safety and all that, but you can't even add 1 day to your life, 1 second to your own life, no matter how much money you've got. Chapter 6, verse 9. I'm going to read that one in the NIV. Chapter 6, verse 9. Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless and a chasing after the wind. Have you ever known anybody that was just always kind of thinking, I would like that house, that car, to live in that city. I'd like that job better. I'd like that better than this. I want the newest iPhone, yeah, or one that their estimation of things is bad. Instead of, the old glass is half full, glass is half empty. I have a friend, I won't name him on the outside chance he ever hears this webcast, which I can't imagine he would. But I've known him since we were teenagers, and he's always just been negative. Everything's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. Daddy's going to die. I'm going to flunk out of school. You got married. My wife's going to go blind. My wife's going to leave me. Everything's bad. This is a guy, I'm convinced, if you gave him $1 million, he would go, now I got all this to worry about. I got to go see a CPA. And, Just everything's negative. The very same stuff I've witnessed in his life that would make other people happy, he would find some way to make it negative. I've witnessed it over. And so here we are. I'm 63 years old. His face is like a guy who's been doing this his whole life. And in some ways he has. I like the guy. But he's just had a negative view of life, Eeyore. Huh? Eeyore. He's Eeyore. Oh, no, it's going to be bad. This guy is going to fall, And by the way, it's very draining to be around people like that.
Do you think part of that could come from some of the earlier childhood experiences?
I don't know. I met him, this particular guy I'm talking about, I met him when we were 13. He was already that way. And I knew his mom and dad, and they were not that way. I know his two brothers, and they're not that way. I don't know how he got that way. I don't know. But it was like everything was a tragedy. Everything was life and death. When I first met him, we were in the 8th grade. His dad was going to die any minute. His dad lived like 30 more years, Anyway, sorry. Sorry to you, my friend, if you're watching, but get over it. Chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Now that verse 7 is kind of alluded to in the New Testament, talking about the end of a thing is better than the beginning, but the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. We celebrate birthdays, but really the finish line is not your birthday. All of us sitting in this room right now, our lives are still in progress. Agreed? The finish line is when you kind of get the verdict. Yeah, they finished well. I hope, pray, and believe we will all finish well. But the truth is, you don't know till it's over. And so the better is the day of man's death. Better when the journey is over. In some ways, to go to a memorial service or a funeral for a saint is really kind of satisfying. I think of Brother Wade's death, Gail. When Brother Wade died, the same guy I was talking about, the Song of Solomon, that had the interesting view on the Song of Solomon with the bride being within the church. The day he died, his daughter called me and asked me to meet him. We didn't know he was dead. And so I got to the hospital before Nancy got there. And they said, "Are you a part of the family?" I said, "No, I'm his pastor." And they said, "Well, he's already gone." And I said, "Oh, really?" And they said, "Would you like to see him?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to see him." And so I went in, and they took me in the little room, and surprising to me, I smiled. And the reason I smiled was I couldn't think of one negative thing about him. I mean, it's not like he was laying there glowing or anything, but just every memory that came back flooding to me as I'm looking at him, I thought, it was a joy to know you. He loved God, and he finished well. He had some ups and downs, but he finished well. And so that day, seeing him laying on the thing, I just smiled, and it was irrepressible. I'm standing there by myself in this little, how they do, Gail, when they close you in the curtains by yourself with the body. I'm just standing there smiling like an idiot thinking, it's been a pleasure knowing you, Brother Wade. And it was. It was. I had some questions about him when I first met him, but we got so close, and he was such a blessing to me. He was 87 years old when he died. I'm standing there thinking, good for you. Now you know what comes next. You're there. You made it. It's over. So there are those. I think we should all have that. I want to have that. I want to finish well. I want my family to have a smile on their face, when they see me gone and so forth. I do. I want to finish well. And I think this idea of better is the day of a man's death. It can be morbid, on Solomon saying, "I just wish I was dead," but I don't think so. I think it's really it's a truthful statement. Better when you finish the journey. Verse 2, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Again, consider your ways. Lord, teach me to number my days. Give my heart to wisdom. Verse 5, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. And so that's iron sharpens iron. Better to hear a sincere word of correction than the song of fools. Verse 8, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Interesting, he puts those together, isn't it? The end of the thing, then a beginning, and the patient in spirit, then the proud in spirit. It's an interesting combination of wording for whatever reasons that he saw something there. Look at 7:14. In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider God also has set the one over against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him. This verse 14, or nothing that will happen after him. Look in your notes in the NIV, that same verse, Ecclesiastes 7:14. When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. I like that wording, I like that much better. Verse 20. Verse 20 is Solomon once again alluding to original sin. As he does in the Proverbs, he does in Ecclesiastes. For there is not a just man upon the earth that does good and has sinned not. In other words, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Solomon affirms that in various ways. There are religious Jews that don't believe in original sin. But from an Old Testament perspective, I think Solomon gives strong support to the concept of original sin, or at least all men being sinners. He says it in various ways in various places. He takes a shot a little bit among women. Verse 27. Behold, this I have found, says the preacher, counting one by one to find out the account, which yet my soul seeks, but I find not one man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found. Lo, this only have I found, that God has made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions, or many schemes or corruptions. And so he's saying, I might have found one decent man among 1,000, but I haven't even found one good woman among 1,000. Remember how many wives and concubines he had? Coincidentally, it was 1,000. He didn't even get one good one out of the deal. Don't know what happened with Abishag the Shulamite. Chapter 8. Who is as the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. This verse 8, the knowledge, when you know that you're right, when you know a given situation, the subject that's being discussed and so forth, it does give you a measure of comfort, peace, advantage conversationally, as opposed to being in the middle of a conversation, you don't have any idea what they're talking about. So it's an interesting view. Look at verse 11. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. In other words, when the punishment for their crime isn't quick forthcoming, other people want to keep on doing bad stuff. This is speaking about, we have the right to a fair trial. Solomon is saying it's beneficial to us to have fair trials because it perpetuates evil if the justice is delayed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Would all of you agree with that?
Or
If it's unequal, it also perpetuates evil. Verse 15 is talking about enjoying life again. He says, Then I commended mirth, because a man has no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry. For that shall abide with him of his life, of his labor, the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. So basically he said, I decided, be happy, enjoy life. This is something that God has given us that we can choose, and it's a good thing. It's kind of like he goes back and forth with this stuff, isn't it? Verse 17 is interesting to me, and I don't think I'm overstating it, but look at verse 17. Then I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. In other words, the things that are not knowable having to do with the created order and the things that are of God. Because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. He's talking about the things that must be perceived by the Spirit, or you're not going to get them. In other words, if God doesn't reveal it, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how learned you are, how much you study, there are things that must be revealed by the Spirit. That's my interpretation of that verse. And so here was the guy that may have been the smartest guy who ever lived, but he realized there's a whole lot of stuff that's not perceived by intellect. It's got to be perceived by the Spirit or revealed by the Spirit of God, because it's out of the earth knowledge realm.
Well, it's left from the phrase, the work of God.
That's where I get that. Yeah. Yeah. It's a long verse, but I think that's what I take it to mean.
Well, I took it to mean that, all of it was created order. Still, even though you see, look at it, touch it, it is so wonderful that we're even not even search how it is done.
I think he's saying that too, but he's pointing out in the midst of all of his other musings, it's a lament that he's not able to perceive beyond what he can perceive, I think. Chapter 9, verse 2, all things come alike to all. Again, common to man. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked and to the good and to the clean and to the unclean, to him that sacrifices and to him that sacrifices not. As is the good, so is the sinner. And he that swears, as he that fears an oath. So it's talking about things that are common to man, no matter what you do. Verse 9, live joyfully with the wife who you love all the days of your life, of your vanity, which he has given you under the sun, all the days of your vanity. For that is your portion in this life, and in your labor which you take under the sun. Whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave where you're going. That's a little morbid, but stop and smell the roses. This is Solomon. Stop to smell the roses along the way.
I just took that as, I only stopped one life.
You know, my dad is with the Lord, and my dad was a decent man. My dad lived his whole life in anticipation of the end of his life. You know, he was always planning what he was going to do when he retired. You know, how am I going to pay my bills when anytime he had spare time, he was calculating and figuring out, you know, when can I do this? What can I do that? He spent his whole life saving and planning for a day that never came. Do you understand what I'm saying now? And in retrospect, this is my own father, who I deeply loved. I think he neglected to understand we got to live along the way too. It's good to be prudent about the end of your life, but there needs to be awareness of what Solomon's saying. Hey, enjoy yourself along the journey. You know, don't just wait for a future day. Get yourself into a position to enjoy the things that you have along the way. It's not all about what comes at the end of your life or what comes tomorrow. Yes, a prudent man makes preparations, but that can't be the sole focus of your life.
Well, it's kind of like the scriptures used earlier about Luke and Silo.
Yes.
How the guy just lived all his life and now obtained it.
Now I can sit back.
Enjoy it. The guy said, no, this is the night that you come be with me.
Well, so my father, his plan was always, you know, he's going to make all these preparations, you know, for my mother, and he was going to die and she was going to be fine. Well, my mother died before my dad. He was totally lost. You know, not spiritually, but it was like his life was over. It totally ruined his plan. He had planned in his mind his whole life, this is the way it's going to happen. It didn't happen that way, you know. About a month after he died, my brother was visiting him, and he asked my brother, how long has it been since your mother was gone? And he said, a month, whatever it was. And he said, it just seems like forever, you know. And to him, you know, it was just totally upended his plans. They were in bad health. They couldn't enjoy what they had saved and so forth. It just didn't work out the way he planned it, bottom line. Yeah. You know, and he put a whole lot of effort into it. Yeah. Okay. Verse 11. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happened to them all. And what do you think that means? How do y'all see that, verse 11? Help me. I mean, obviously it's the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, but what else? Huh? I think that's what he's saying too. I think he says you can't just, I think he's saying just because somebody seems to be successful, it doesn't mean they're the smartest, the wisest, the strongest. Time and chance happened to them in that direction. You might have been stronger, smarter, wiser, and things didn't work out so well for you. You know, that also is part of the condition of life. I know two guys that started a landscaping business years ago. They worked like dogs. I mean, 60, 80-hour weeks. Nobody could have worked any harder. And they worked like that for like 10 years, and they went stone cold broke. I mean, they worked their butts off. I never knew anybody worked harder than those two guys. They were two smart guys. They had a good plan. They went broke. You know, I remember thinking at the time, if hard work could have done it, those guys should have been multimillionaires. You know.
It's also an implication because you do stuff like that, you don't know what can happen along the way. Somebody's car could have ran into theirs, or they could hit somebody's car and they can see.
Our customers, in their case, customers not paying them for big jobs and, debt on equipment and these kind of things sank their ship, things out of their control. The stuff they could control, they worked so hard. But this is talking about things out of our control. Chapter 10, verse 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. That's interesting, isn't it? How are you going to eat yourself? It's an interesting image. Verse 19, chapter 10, verse 19. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry, but money answers all things. By the way, I've heard that quoted by people with money. Have you heard that one? Money answers all things, It's usually somebody that has money that quotes that.
I have not heard. I don't know enough people that have that kind of money.
Well, they're boasting is what they're doing. When I've heard it, it's boasting. They don't really realize what they're saying. How about a feast is made for laughter and wine makes merry? I don't think that's talking about junk. It's not endorsing drinking too much, but it's an interesting phrase, isn't it? I don't think because he's already gone through, he sought wine and it was not a good thing. Verse 20, curse not the king, no, not in your thoughts, and curse not the rich in your bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice that which has wings shall tell the matter. In other words, watch your mouth when you're talking about powerful people, they'll find out. Okay, so chapter 11, verse 1 and 2. These are quoted a lot, and I want to ask y'all what you think they mean. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you shall find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for you know not what evil shall be upon the earth. Those two verses go together. But if you want, take them individually. Cast your bread upon the water, for you shall find it after many days. What do you think he's saying here?
Like helping people because they might come back and help you, or they will come back and help you.
Sowing and I think it's sowing and reaping. Yeah, I think there's an aspect of sowing and reaping with that too. How about to give a portion to 7, also to 8, for you know not what evil will come upon the earth.
This is about a generosity of heart, so that you're not so stingy. A generous heart will have. It's kind of hard to be a generous heart.
Yeah, I agree. I've known people, I'm not one of them, but I've known people with what a friend of mine categorizes as saying their mercy gear is stuck, their mercy button is stuck on wide open. In other words, they are generous to their own hurt. Sometimes they do so many things. But this verse 2, give a portion to 7 and also to 8. That was also one of the late Larry Burkett's favorite verses. Remember when we were talking about Proverbs and financial principles? He took that to mean don't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, like if you've got whatever you got, you don't put all your money in your house, you don't put all your money in your retirement account, you don't put all your money under your mattress. You divide it up into portions because, you know, if one part goes bad, you still got the other parts. I think there's a number of books that have been written on that as a financial principle, in fact. You know, it is wise investment advice. That's the principle of mutual funds, really. You know, spreading things around. Verse 4, he that observes the wind shall not sow, and he that regards the clouds shall not reap. That's talking about laziness, you know, just being worthless. Verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and in the evening withhold not your hand. For you know not whether what shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be good alike. So again, it's talking about diligence and persistence and consistency. Now, chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the finale of this, and it starts with a reminiscing about growing old. And so chapter 12 in the King James, once again, is a little bit obscure. I've got it in the NIV in your notes. I think it's referring to the aging process. So just follow with me. The first part of this, the first 8 verses, or specifically the first 7 verses, are talking about the aging process. Chapter 12, verse 1. Remember your Creator in the day of your youth. So that's the setting. He's looking back at youth. He's not young. Before the days of trouble come and the years approach, so he's talking about latter times, when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. He's talking about the dimming of your eyes. Not the changing of nature, but the dimming of your eyes. And the clouds return after the rain. When the keepers of the house tremble and strong men stoop. Everybody's seen an older person, you know, with the whatever with the calcium deficiencies or whatever, where they start to be stoop-shouldered, curved spines. When the grinders cease because they're few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. When people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and dangers in the streets. You know, this idea of older people being scared. What was that noise? You know, well, I don't know if I want to go out of the house, kind of thing. When the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire is no longer stirred. So he's talking about no longer having intimacy, marital intimacy, and so forth. Then people go to their eternal home. And mourners go about in the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed. That reference to the silver cord is talking about the cord of life. The silver cord. Interestingly, that term, the silver cord, is used in occult circles for the cord of life. So this silver cord is not, they didn't originate it, it's in the Bible. But it's talking about that string of life that's holding you to this existence, this mortal coil, as it's been said. Yeah, is that what you started to say? Yes. And the golden bowl is broken before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, and the wheel is broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. That verse 7, you know, God gave the spirit, his spirit, into Adam, and this idea of our spirits will once again return to the Lord. Of course, to give an account, but the intent is that we would be with him forever. And then verse 8, he says, when you're old, you look back and you think, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. And I think he's talking about the 11 chapters we just read, not just those 8 verses. So does he leave us with that? He doesn't, thank God. Let's just read verse 8 in the King James again. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. So everything's meaningless. And moreover, because the preacher was still wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yeah, he gave out good heed, and he sought out and set in order many proverbs. So that's what he's doing right here. He's teaching us wisdom in the context of this book, wisdom literature. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. The words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. And further by these, My son, be admonished. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. And verse 13 is the conclusion. Now let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So this is the point of the book, and then the kicker is verse 14. For God shall bring every work into judgment, and every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. And so he said all the preceding, kind of reviewing the things that people commonly think, this will make me happy, this will make my life meaningful, this is something I should pursue, this is the way I should behave. He puts it all in perspective, and he basically says, and he does, I'm paraphrasing, enjoy the life that you've been given because it's fleeting, and be aware of the fact that to love God, to know God, and obey him is what you're here for. And so those other human pleasures that you can enjoy, thank God for them, enjoy them, but don't let them distract you from the main thing. It's all about a pursuit of God. And so this is a wonderful world that we've been given. Everybody remember that movie, the Christmas movie, It's a Beautiful Life? You know, the guy had a very difficult situation. Yeah, and he came to the realization through the help of God in the movie that it wasn't as bleak as he thought it was. We have a wonderful life. And I think God appreciates people that are able to be thankful and to express gratitude to him, even in difficult times. You know, it's not always going to be in a happy dance. Remember, there's a time for everything. But there are always things to thank God for. There's always an awareness of what God has done, you know, what God is to us. Of course, He created us to be with Him, and ultimately the end of this life is always before us in our thoughts. But more than that, there's always things to thank God for. And I don't know about you, but I really appreciate people who have gratitude. I don't appreciate complaining and nagging. I appreciate grateful, kind people. And I think God is like that. I think it's an attribute of God. I think the Lord is appreciative and gracious, you know, and thankful when we do things in agreement with Him and toward Him. So what do y'all think about the idea of Solomon getting saved at the end of his life? Do you see it that way, or you see it some other way?
Yeah, I see it that way. Based on he realized I had everything, but what I did not have is what he found at the end. What he needed.
That's good. Yeah. Anybody else?
I always had a hard time it's hard turning to idols. First of all, I had a hard time with
He didn't mention the idolatry pursuit.
in this thing, but
Yep.
that always troubled me. I always took the whole weight of his life.
Well, there are definitely those you will read that, you know, seem to think he lost his way and lost eternity, you know, but I'm not one of those. I think that he made some mistakes. It's recorded there for our instructions, but I think this is his testimony, ultimately. This is not written from the position of a 20-year-old. This is an older guy reflecting. Gail, you had something?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, if he wrote the Song of Solomon, might have based on real people, but also like, if he has some understanding of our longing for the Lord and the Lord's longing for us,
Right.
that much should make peace with God.
Yeah.
If that's the way he wrote it.
Well, God said of Solomon when he was young, he loved me. He loves me. You know, he doesn't say that about many people in the Bible, but he says it about Solomon. So there was definitely a time as a young person he was very close to the Lord. And I think the Lord's smart enough to bring him back around on a redemptive path at the end. Maybe his life wasn't as long and glorious in God as it should have been, but I think his final end, he returned to the Lord. And y'all can tell me different. We'll find out when we get to heaven. That's my opinion. I got the microphone. That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Did the Lord allow this writing?
In the Bible, if he wasn't squared away? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. That is a really good question. Yeah, that is, I've never heard that question, and it is an interesting thought, isn't it? In other words, if he didn't get squared away, why would God put his words in the canon of Scripture? That is really a good, interesting thought.
See, and now, I guess again, it's kind of like being saved at the end of his life. That's
I'm talking about being in right relationship with
Yeah.
God.
right, and I guess the concept of salvation in terms of the way we think of it in our modern evangelical, I don't see it the same way throughout all. You know,
Well, how about this? Let me put it this way. And I think you'll agree with this. Solomon was born into a godly family. God saw him come into the world. God had redemptive plans for him all of his life. God planned and ordered things toward his redemptive purposes for Solomon. And so God was, through the course of his life, pursuing Solomon, trying to bring him to a good finish line. I think God was able to do that. I know we all believe he was capable, as all-powerful, he could have done it, but I think that his redemptive influence, because of his father and his history and so forth, I think the Lord's redemptive influence would have come to bear. Truth is, we'll find out when we get on the other side. If there's no Solomon, we know we won't remember it anyway, because we won't regret what's not there.
Well, I just kind of look at it. You look at this room, everybody's here for a purpose. We're searching to have a relationship with God. And we all know people that are not in this room that have probably could be anywhere.
Yeah.
We don't know where they are, but we know where we are. And we know where we're
Yeah, and many of them were on fire for God younger, and then they're going through whatever they're going through, disappointment, whatever. So let's just pray. Lord, we just pray that those who in this season of life are in that season of pursuing meaningless pursuits, Lord, we read about wine, and we read about singers and partying and joy and laughter, and sex is implied from the women, and the power, all these things that people pursue, thinking it will bring them satisfaction. Lord, we just ask that you would impress on those that we think of now, that there is no satisfaction inside of them from anything other than you. There may be a temporary dulling and anesthetizing and numbing for that heartache, Lord, but the only thing that'll satisfy it is you. We just pray, God, that you would bring your redemptive purposes to bear in each life, Lord, that they would all come back around to the reality, as Solomon's words say here, that the meaning of life is to be obedient to you and in right relationship with you, that all other pursuit is a false pursuit, that we all share this same limited lifetime, but it's about getting into right position with you and loving relationship with you. So God, help us. Help us here to finish well. May our end be better than the day of our birth. May those who love us celebrate more at the end of our lives than at the beginning. And Lord, may we see your full redemptive purposes for those who are estranged in this season. In Jesus' name, amen.